Inspections 101. So we've had the chance to work together. I don't think we've done a home inspection yet together, but soon enough.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
I've heard great things.
Good, good. So, so home inspections 101. So pillar to post. This is just a little bit about me. My kid seems to think that it's really funny to eat with his foot. So he like smashes the food with his foot and then eats it. So, yeah, just really funny. And then that's my wife and my kid at his 1-year birthday party. We did a little dedication ceremony there at Millennium Park. So this is my team right here. Abby answers the phones, helps with some marketing. Andrew's my other inspector. Hopefully by next year that picture will be 4 people. So, but how to become a pillar to post home inspector. So before you can even do an inspection, something to consider is that in the state of Michigan, there is no licensing to be a home inspector. So if any one of you wanted to be a home inspector right now, you could say, I am a home inspector, and you're good to go. There are 0 credentials in the state of Michigan to meet that. In Ohio, there's licensing. In Texas, they have Texas, New York, and California. They have like their own whole thing, and Florida, and it's very difficult to become a home inspector there. So, but in Michigan, it's very, very easy. I will tell you that have been talking with the state for a while, and I think there may be some licensing that pops up. Pillar to Post is one of those companies though where what we have to go through before we can open up, all Pillar to Post will get grandfathered in pretty much right away. Just we have to go through, it's 80 to 120 hours online for ASHI, or AHIT. Then we have to meet the ASHI standards. Then to be a franchise owner, you have to pass the National Home Inspectors exam, which that's a 3-hour exam that's proctored, and you have to, it's hard to pass too. Then there's 4 months of training with live instructors online with Pillar to Post. Some of that's business, some of it's inspection related, because you got to know how do you do accounting for a inspection business, and how you do marketing for it. So, but there's quite a bit. Now, do you know how many hours you need to get your builder's license?
150?
I think it's 60.
60.
Yeah.
It's either 150 or 60. Yeah.
Now, that's not. I don't think that's. You can go out and build a home right after that. But you can go out and start up a renovation company and do renovations after 60 hours online. So it is harder to become a Pillar to Post home inspector than it is to become your own builder.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but that's not true for all home inspectors. So that said, there are 2 different programs that home inspectors should abide by. It's either ASHI or InterNACHI. I follow ASHI, and I know Susan loves ASHI. She's a big fan of that. What I will tell you is that the difference between ASHI and InterNACHI is very limited in terms of the actual standards of practice. They're designed to appeal to different styles of home inspection companies. So InterNACHI is more focused on single owner operators where they need more resources to help with education, just to keep the business up and running. ASHI is more focused on larger inspection companies where there's a lot of interaction between the large companies and ASHI, so Pillar to Post has a big impact on ASHI and what it looks like. So it just depends on the nature of your home inspection business and what you want it to be. So that's a little bit about Pillar to Post. So what is a home inspection? So it's a visual examination of the physical structures of a home. And the word functional should also be in there. What I would tell you is that a lot of people think that there's a lot of stuff that we should do that we don't do, and there's a slide coming up that talks about that. But a home examination is going to be what can we see, touch, feel, and operate. We can't go beyond that. And so I'll give you a couple quick examples. I actually have a complaint in my phone right now from a realtor from last week where there was a spot that's on a ceiling in a basement, and it's a finished drywall ceiling. It's underneath what I believe is likely a shutoff valve for a hose bib. The spot was stained a yellowish color, and when I put my moisture meter on it, which I tested on my hand, it goes off. You put it on the ceiling, it goes off. And it shows it's 99% moisture content. If you see a stain on the ceiling and your moisture meter goes off, what are you going to say? What else can I say? What I'm not doing is pulling out a drywall knife, cutting into the drywall and pulling that back to see what's going on. And so this lady was upset with me because she's like, well, I went in and touched it and it's dry. And I'm like, well, first of all, if you go just based on your hand, that's why we have a few extra tools to help us, but your hand doesn't necessarily feel moisture. And secondly, that still doesn't explain why the stain's there. Where did the stain come from?
Right.
So those are things where I'm limited, where I can't cut the drywall away and tell you what's behind it, but what I can do is use visual and functional tools to help me understand what's going on. Sorry, these slides are a little bit out of order, but so a couple things about pillar to post too. Just we've done 700 inspections, so ASHI, AHIT certified. There's 15 franchises in Michigan. I'm now ranked 5th. We'll be hopefully
Nice.
3rd by next summer.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're plowing ahead. So all right, so what are the ASHI standards? So for ASHI, when we go through and do an inspection, these are all the categories that we're looking at specifically for every home inspection report. So roofing, plumbing, structural, exterior, electrical, heating, AC, interiors, insulation and ventilation, and then fireplaces and fuel burning appliances. There are other things that can be added to that, but in terms of the ASHI standards, this is what's included in a home inspection report. So when you think about roofing, that one's pretty self-explanatory. We're looking at chimneys, we're looking at flashings, but it's based on what we can see. I had somebody ask me one time, are you going to go up there and walk around and test for soft spots? And I'm like, you're on a 12-12 pitch, and there's frost on that roof. No, I'm not going to go walk around up there. Plumbing is looking at the water main, drain and waste, distribution piping. It's looking at sump pumps, hose bibs. What it doesn't include is like the irrigation system outside. In the wintertime, you can't check that anyway, but in the summertime, that's a whole separate thing if you want to have that. It takes like 30-45 minutes just to look at an irrigation system, right? So I always recommend a specialist for that specifically. Structural is pretty self-explanatory, but again, it's what we can see. So if you have a home with completely finished basement walls, again, I can't tear down the drywall, so it's limited to what I can see. Exteriors is basically what you're thinking, so vinyl siding, stone siding, decks, patios. I will tell you most of the time what we find wrong with structural issues outside is going to be related to decks or vegetation. So if you have anything that's touching the house vegetation-wise or growing on your AC condenser, growing on your electrical main, whatever it might be, that's going to be stuff related to the exterior. For electrical, that's including all branch wiring, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, electrical mains, distribution, panels, sub-panels, anything that's related to electrical that you can think of. Heating and air conditioning, this one's primarily looking at the visual and then functional aspects of it. We don't tear them apart. There's no way for us to tear them apart. You wouldn't want us doing that anyway. So you can see, like, we have to be, diligent enough to be able to look in all these different categories to be able to tell, right, whether or not we can, you can come over too if you want to sit a little closer or something.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. I just didn't know if you were feeling lonely over there.
I just want to sit by Dan.
That's right. So
I have
these
to
are
be
the
nice
categories. Remember, there are tons of subcategories under each one of these things, but any questions on what ASHI covers? Because we do include a copy of the ASHI standards with every home inspection. There's a link included with every inspection agreement that we put out. We try to make it as clear as possible, but any questions on specifically the technical sides of what is covered? Does that make sense? Anything you think is missing? Like, I have no idea, there could be.
Basements.
Pools. Basements would fall under, it can be plumbing, structural, basements in general would be structural.
So then when you offer like radon testing, is that something outside of ASHI then?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, radon testing is not a part of the ASHI standards.
Okay.
So here's what's not included in ASHI, and this is typically something that people just don't consider. So specifically, we do not cover anything that is not readily accessible. So what does that mean? Well, in some areas, your water main is buried underground, like the actual meter, out in a sidewalk. I know down in Atlanta, I actually did some things to the rental I was living at that I probably shouldn't have, but anyway. But that water main was outside. And the only way, so for instance, something like that, it's covered up, it's underneath city jurisdiction. I can't inspect that. In some cases, for instance, Andrew was at a house last week, it was a manufactured home, but the water heater had a covered wall panel with trim around it, all nailed in place. So in order for us to look at the water heater, we would have had to bring a hammer, pull that trim out, which we could damage it while doing that. So if you have something that's not in a readily accessible condition, if it was screwed in place, we'd take the screws out. But once it's nailed in, I don't know if it's caulked in, I don't know what's behind there, I don't know if I'm going to damage the trim trying to get it off, and as soon as we damage something, we become liable for it. So that would not be considered readily accessible. Future conditions. So I had a client ask me, I went back because they said the roof is leaking. And they showed me a spot on the ceiling, and I pulled up the 360 tour from 2 months prior, and I'm like, that spot's not there in the 360 tour. So that happened within the last 2 months at some point. I'm sorry that you're going through this, but that's unfortunately just how it goes sometimes. Things happen. And this girl looked at me and she goes, you should have been able to predict this. And she was 16, and she literally went like this.
What?
And I'm like, I'm sorry, but if I'm predicting what's going to happen on a house, I'm going to go work on Wall Street. I'm not going to
You're
be able
16,
to.
you shouldn't
Yeah.
be doing this.
Yeah, well, she was the only one that spoke English in the house, so
Oh.
that's why I was communicating through the 16-year-old.
I see.
Code and regulatories. So we had a client the other week where he was a commercial electrician and there was no permit sticker on the upgraded panel. He called that out. He's like, that's a problem. And I had to, because Andrew was doing the inspection, and I had to call the client afterwards, and I'm like, look, I'm very sorry, but we do not do code compliance. First of all, we wouldn't necessarily agree with all the codes in compliance based on the ASHI standards. For instance, code and compliance would say that as long as you have a window, it's a bathroom, you have proper exhaust pipe. Are you going to open a window in January in Michigan while you're taking a shower so that moisture doesn't build up? No.
I do.
You do?
By my builder brother-in-law, that's that's
You
really
open
good.
the window in January.
Just a little, not much, so that way everything can just come out, you know
Yeah.
what I mean, and you close it in 15 minutes, I mean.
Yeah, it'll all, yeah. Well, you're the first person I've met because I'd be freezing my rear end off.
I'll be barbecuing outside, right next to my door, in the middle of winter.
In the middle of winter. Well, actually, I do that too.
I'm craving ribeye, I crave anything, I'll be there. I mean, I don't really feel it, I don't wear any gloves unless I'm touching the snow.
Yeah,
That's when I really feel it.
yeah, yeah. Well, so for instance, on the electrical panel that we did, the guy was a commercial electrician. He said there's no permit sticker that's here. And what we don't know is, did they just put that panel on themselves? Did they forget to get the permit sticker added onto it? For instance, I had a new furnace added into my house. The HVAC company finished up, and then the city called me and said, hey, do you want to schedule a time where we can send an inspector out so that you can have your furnace checked and permitted? The HVAC company does not permit it. You have to have somebody from the township or city to come out and permit it.
Seriously?
Yeah, so what happens if I just don't answer the phone when the city calls? Or what happens if I don't know to get the follow-up to get the permit sticker on it?
But those companies, they will tell you, right, that you will need to get it inspected by the city.
They tell you.
No, but I just get mine, and they didn't tell me that. I mean, I didn't know that that was a
Well,
requirement.
so the city could call you, the HVAC company could tell you, but I will tell you in a lot of cases, nobody gets the permits done. Like, you get it pulled with the city, so the HVAC company paid the city to have it permitted. I didn't pay anything. But then to have the guy come out and permit it, that's a separate process.
Yeah.
That's good to know, yeah.
So if the sticker's not on it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's incorrect. And that's why I'm looking for visual defects on a system. I'm not looking for permit stickers. So those honestly don't mean much to me when I see a permit sticker. We don't operate things that are shut down or inoperable. We had one last week where the propane tank was completely empty, and so we couldn't operate the furnace and we couldn't operate the water heater. And the realtor asked me, can you just bring a propane tank out and just hook it up? I'm like,
Seriously?
Let me get right on that.
no. I don't carry propane around in my truck and just, hook it up. First of all, it doesn't work that
An
way.
agent only needs 40 hours
Yeah,
to get a license.
I know. So if it's inoperable, the other thing though that comes up sometimes is we had one where the homeowner had turned the gas line off on the furnace. It's the middle of summertime, so you're not typically operating your furnace, but we don't know why they turned that off. So for us to turn it on, if there's a defect in the furnace where it's leaking and then all of a sudden something happens, again, we become liable for that. So if it's shut down, our next step usually is text the selling agent and ask them why it's off. Oh yeah, they turned that off in the summertime, they said you can turn that back on. Okay, cool, we'll turn it back on. But if the selling agent says, I don't know why that's off, well, I'm sorry, we're not turning it on then. We gotta have some reason to know why that's off. It's the same thing with breakers. I don't know if somebody's doing electrical work out in a garage, the breaker isn't labeled on the panel. Maybe it is labeled, but I don't necessarily know what all they've branched off from that. And they have two wires tied together. I flip that on, it shorts everything out, sends the load back down the main line. Again, if it's turned off, shut down, or inoperable, we cannot test that. And then operations of systems outside of normal operating controls. When I operate an oven, I click bake. Is it at 350? Start. We don't go through and check every single setting on the oven. I'm not checking the convection oven and how much airflow is moving through the oven, because you could have an endless amount of things that you're checking when you get to that point. I had one client, it was the seller that called me afterwards and they said, you damaged their oven. Their oven doesn't work anymore. And I said, I wrote it up in my report that the oven doesn't work. What do you mean? And they said, well, they said it worked before you got there. And I said, well, I'm looking at a picture of the panel on this electric oven, and there's water all through it. You can see it bubbling inside of this electrical panel or the digital display on the oven. I can promise you I didn't get a pan out, put water in it, and boil it, and have it spill over so that it got inside the panel. That's not how we test things. And some people think that when an inspector goes in, we're tearing apart appliances.
Yeah.
I can't do that in 3 hours. That's
Right.
you don't have that kind of time. And then the last thing is just we reserve the right where if there's anything during the inspection that could potentially put us in harm, we can say no to that. The most common thing that will come up in that category is in an attic. If there's no catwalk and we can't see the trusses, we in most cases will not get in that attic and move around. If the attic is really pitched steep and I can get up there and get up through the garage and make a couple maneuvers to try and move around, I'm going to do that. But in a lot of cases, as soon as we put our foot through drywall up in a ceiling, we now have to fix that. So I'm not going to be in business very long if I have inspectors putting their feet through drywall. So that's what's not included in an inspection. So a few things to always consider too. There's no such thing as a perfect home, but yet anything can be fixed. I've been seeing this more and more in Grand Rapids, where they're taking older homes, lifting them up, putting them on crib stacks, pouring new foundations all the way around, and then you set it back down, and now you have a full basement on an old home. So it's a great way to add additional living space on the future.
That costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
All right, so what are some of the stuff that we would typically find on a house? So this is where it starts to get interesting. So I have, obviously, terabytes of photos now of defects, but I try to pick out a few just to go through and show you guys and talk about how I would go through each one of these things. So we're going to start out with foundation issues. So on the left here, I'm going to stand up for this because this will be easier if I can actually point at stuff on the screens. So on the left here, you have stacked up wood that's not straight up and down. You have concrete block that's also not on a footing. You can see that in another photo down there. All of that is not something that's going to be structurally sound. However, there's something really key about this right here. And what you'll notice is that the joists are running this way on the floor. So that's not holding up a major structural component, that's holding up one joist. which means that all of that is there to prevent a floor from likely just being soft. So we call that out and say that's improper. How big of a deal is it? I
The
have
only
to,
purpose of that might be to get rid of the squeak, but the rest of the foundation might be okay.
yeah.
So
So,
you're just pointing to it because you saw it.
yep. So,
But also what is up there too, because if you put a lot of weight into, especially kitchens, people they want that big island. I did it in one of my house.
what if you put a
we
gun
need-
safe right there?
Exactly,
Right.
we just need to go and
Yeah.
see
So
what we can put some
we
support.
need to call it out. You need to be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the next question of how big of a deal is it? That becomes a very subjective territory when you're doing inspections. And that's what makes our job really difficult, is I can see something like that, and in writing I'm gonna say, pier and column for foundational structure is improper, recommend a structural engineer, evaluate further and correct as needed. If you didn't go to the inspection and all you're seeing is this photo and that verbiage, you're like, well, shoot, what's going on with the house? This is a really big deal. I might look at that and say, no, that's underneath a living room and the floorboard was squeaking and somebody crawled in there and jammed that stuff up there, because that's what they had, to prevent it from squeaking and being loose. Yes, there's a better way to do that, but no, you're not gonna suddenly cave through the floor, your house is gonna fall down. Now this right here is a different foundational photo. So you have a crack that's running up a poured concrete wall. I see these cracks all the time. They're not a problem if all you see is the crack. What makes this one a problem is, do you see all the white residue around the outside of it?
Yeah.
That means
Water?
that it's actively leaking.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, now again, how big of a deal is it? How much does it cost? So for cracks like this, some people may say, well, I need to excavate, I need to refinish the outside wall, this is going to be expensive. And what I would tell you is that in most cases, that's not true. You epoxy this, you put injector pins in it, and you shoot epoxy into the crack after the outside is sealed, so that no water is going to actually come through.
Do they need to dig it from the outside too, or no?
No. If you inject epoxy, you don't need to do anything.
Oh.
So that again, both of these are foundational issues, but both of them to fix are probably in the hundreds of dollars or less,
Okay.
right, to fix it. Now this is a foundation issue that I would say is a much bigger issue. And these ones are this is the most difficult foundation issue that I come up across many times. And so you can see the horizontal cracking on concrete block, and then if you look right here, you see that you have a storage unit that's straight up and down, but the wall is clearly bowing out, and it's bowing out by about 3 inches between the top and then right somewhere there in the middle. The challenge with this is twofold. One, from a structural standpoint, is the house going to cave in? Probably not, but what it may do is over time it might keep moving, and at some point if you do nothing down the road, it might cave in. The second issue is around waterproofing. Do you need this basement to be waterproof? So if you are living in a home like this and all you want it to do is be structurally sound, then all you need to do is that. So
I saw a
these-
house like that. That's a good idea to
Yep.
do. That's a good idea because I saw a house. It was the same as that. The whole wall, it looks like it was cracking, right?
Yep,
And they put some supports in front of it because you can see
yeah.
it ending.
Yeah, so that's what those do, is those don't restore the wall back, but what it does do is prevent the wall from moving any further. The other issue though, oftentimes with walls like this, because again, I see this in concrete block walls all the time, you gotta know if you're buying a home with concrete block, they built it with block because it's quicker and it's cheaper to do than building with poured concrete. You don't have to put forms there, you don't have to wait as long, you can build the home faster. The downside to it is these seams leak all the time. The other issue is that concrete blocking and mortar is going to expand and contract a lot more. You have a greater likelihood of getting a greater range of cracks, and so you have more likelihood of getting water that's going to come in through the wall too. So the number one thing you need to make sure you do, if you have a concrete block foundation, is put gutters on the house. Put gutters on the house and make sure your grading is okay. That's extremely important with homes like this. You can put bracing up on that wall just like this, but if you want to keep water out of the basement without spending $10,000 to put in a waterproofing system, make sure your gutters are clean and clear, and make sure that you have good grading outside to get the water away from the house.
That can be a big problem. Do you recommend to really go and push that for the buyer if they really like the house, or you tell them, look, I don't think that is a good option? Because you never know, with the crack
Yeah.
foundation.
So it is never in our purview to tell somebody whether or not to buy a home. If they want us to consult around whether it makes sense, I try to do that with the help of the agent while they're there. Because the main thing is I don't know their financial standpoint. I don't know if this is for their kid. I don't know if they're really in love with this school district. And so that's where we got to give them the technical information, but we rely on you guys to have the consultative approach of how does this play into the overall picture of whether they're going to buy the house or not. The other issue is, are you going to use the basement for storage, or are you looking to finish it out and actually have another living space? If you're going to finish it out, you need to waterproof it. The other issue with basements like this, if you don't have air conditioning in the home, you're going to struggle with high humidity levels, which means lots of condensation on the walls, likely mold issues, and so you either need to have dehumidifiers running perpetually, or you need to put air conditioning in the house. Air conditioning is a natural dehumidifier.
Yeah.
Other foundation issues. This is really common, where we see rusted metal columns or wooden columns that are starting to be eaten out at the bottom. This is an example of a concrete block wall where there was a cement driveway alongside it that was slanted towards the house, so every time it rained. And this was on the gable end, so you don't have any gutters that can help you with this. Water just sits right there until it works its way down the wall, and then it pools, and that's just building up pressure. Now, have any of you, so this is just kind of a quick lesson on water pressure. Have any of you ever done the experiment where you take a hose and you go down underwater and you see how far down you can go with a hose on your mouth, and the other end of the hose is above the water, and see how far down you can go and breathe? You ever tried that? You have?
Yeah.
How far down do you think you can make it?
Oh no, I was saying maybe maybe from the top all the way to the bottom, maybe?
Yeah, not even that. If you go more than 3 feet down, it'll cave in your lungs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like,
So this whole thing where people will, in cartoons where they take the reed, as long as you're only about that far below the water, you can do it, but you're going to struggle to breathe.
yeah.
Water pressure is immense. Water is extremely heavy. And so imagine water building up pressure. If you have water that's saturating the ground directly outside of your foundation wall, starting down here and it builds all the way up to the top where it's saturated and starting to pool, the amount of pressure that's down here at the bottom of the wall is extremely immense. And so what relieves that water pressure? It's called drain tile. So that's a different class, but drain tile is what relieves it. Goes to a sump pump, kicks the water up, out, and away. So when you do have major problems, that's what they do, is they cut the inside of this wall. They don't excavate. They cut the inside of the wall, they put a new drain tile, run it to a sump pump, and now you have that system there to protect yourself. But it's about 10 grand.
Yeah, I was holding a wall, so that's why I was like out there. We used to play like that when we were little,
Yeah. Roof issues. So it's very important to know the difference between 3-tab versus architectural. This is called a keyhole right here between the 2 tabs. And for architectural style, you're going to have this additional layer that covers up the keyhole. That is what gives it extra life. So a 3-tab shingle, you lay it flat and it just looks like one sheet. For an architectural style shingle, it looks like 2 sheets laid on top of each other. And so that's why these last 25 years, these only last 15 years. Common roof issues that we see: damaged or missing shingles, balding, where the asphalt is basically washed away. That's a sign that it's aging. Damage from hailstorms. This is all damage right here. Buildup of moss and mildew. In this picture it's a little bit difficult to see, but there's a bunch of shingles that are curling and lifting. When that happens, that means that they're dried out and they've started to separate from down below. The basic structure of either one of these shingles is it's a sheet of fiberglass dipped in tar with asphalt on top of it. The asphalt protects the tar from being dried out from the sun. The tar prevents water from penetrating through, and the fiberglass helps it to hold its shape. So what ends up happening is there's a little bit of tar on the bottom side of it, so that when this shingle is sitting right here, this tar that's right here is holding it down to these next shingles. If that dries out, it'll start to lift like this. And so that's how you know the roof is getting towards the end of its life, if you see lifting shingles. Balding is another sign, usually that there's poor ventilation inside of the attic, or it's just an aging shingle. But typically it means you have bad ventilation. The attic is heating up in the summertime, baking out those shingles, making the roof even hotter. And as that tar dries out, when it rains, it washes off the asphalt a lot faster. Stuff like this, it's just an older roof. You could have squirrels, raccoons. Who knows why this is popping off right here, but that's very common. Other things that we typically look for with roof issues, if you have wood siding in particular that's in contact with the roof decking, that's going to rot out. That's not going to last very long. Or even if you have just nail heads that are exposed, even if they are zinc-coated nail heads, those are not going to last forever, and they eventually become leaking points in the roof. So you want those sealed. Common appliance issues. So this one right here is a completely charred out grill in the back of a dryer. So we check temperatures and we're looking for that. This typically means that something's going on here where the burner elements are causing too much heat. And if you put your clothes in there, they can spontaneously combust. Usually this is a sign of a clogged dryer vent. So heat isn't getting out, it's just building up inside of the dryer. So the problem in most cases isn't necessarily what you see, but it's what happens down the road. This is something where I tell people this is the best $30 that you can spend in your life. These are rubber hoses hooked up to a washer and dryer. They either corrode, like that one, that's pretty common, or in some cases they bubble out like this. As soon as they start to fail like this, and this was a family where they had newborn twins, the house was in great shape, but this was about to burst. So I turned them off, texted the agent, and I'm like, I shut your water off to your washer, they need to replace the hoses immediately. And the selling agent was like, awesome, thank you, that saved us a ton. Because imagine you go to work, that busts, and you come back 4 hours later, how much water do you think is going to be in your basement? A lot. Crawl spaces commonly are done improperly. So crawl spaces in attics, you always have to consider moisture content, insulation, and ventilation. So attics are almost always treated as an exterior space. Crawl spaces can be an interior or exterior space. If it's an exterior space, it needs to be sealed off, insulated from the house, and ventilated to the outside. If it's going to be treated as an interior space with a crawl space, it doesn't need to be insulated, but it does need to be sealed off from the outside, which includes the ground, and then it needs to be heated and cooled with the HVAC system. So in this particular case, what do you think would be easiest here? You have a concrete block foundation, exposed ground right there, and all this insulation that's up there, installed backwards by the way, facing the wrong way and falling down. So what would be the easiest way to fix this?
Take all that insulation off and blow insulation in.
Putting some plastic on the bottom, you know, because if
Yep.
that one is exposed, I mean, at least in Tennessee, I don't see that here. Most of the houses on the crawl space, they put some plastic,
That
right?
should be
for
here
the-
too.
Yeah, but here I don't really see that in houses, to be honest.
It should be here, but a lot of people do it themselves and don't know any better. So
Exactly, for the,
you should have
community.
this one in particular, let's assume that there's ducting up top that's running to the floor. Rip all the insulation out,
Yeah.
throw a vapor barrier down here, and put one duct down as a supply in that crawl space so that you can recirculate stuff, assuming there's no mold that's in that crawl space.
Just clean it, right? If it is on to
Yeah.
prevent the...
Yeah, otherwise then you're good to go. But you don't, a lot of people don't think about it. It's easier to treat a crawl space as an interior space than an exterior space. If it's an external space, you still need a vapor barrier between the home and the crawl space. Typically, if you're adding insulation afterwards, you're going to use unfaced insulation, and then you're going to put a plastic barrier, because this paper barrier will do that, where it'll deteriorate and fall off.
Yeah.
So if you're going to use a paper barrier, it needs to be facing the heated or the conditioned space. And then you would still need vents in the wall to ventilate it to the outside so that you don't get stagnant air. I've opened up enough crawl spaces where they're completely encapsulated and it's awful. Really awful. Plumbing. So this is a common issue with galvanized plumbing. Galvanized oftentimes doesn't corrode from the outside, it corrodes from the inside where it starts to close itself off. And so if you're in a home that has galvanized and you notice that water pressure is dropping, that's what's happening. And that's why when we get into a home, we call it out, let them know, recommend you update it to PEX. It's usually $1 to $3 grand, depending on the home. But insurance companies will charge additional premiums for this too, because if you lose water, you gotta have that fixed pretty much right away, and now you gotta pay for it anyway to get it fixed. Or, worst case scenario, this starts to corrode and open up, and when that starts to leak, now you have a pressurized line leaking into the house. Insurance companies don't like seeing galvanized lines in homes.
Kyle, that just made me think of the situation where, like, you and I live not very far from each other, and there's a neighborhood in our area that just had a water main break, right? And now the city and the stinking insurance companies are fighting back and forth with each other of who's going to be responsible for paying for it.
Whose fault is it?
It's so ridiculous. In my opinion, the city should be paying for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Chance of that. So shut-off valves leak all the time. Make sure you don't close those off. We look for that in inspections. And then copper lines, when you start seeing the white residue buildup, that means that it's leaking. What ends up happening is if you were to take your hand and rub it on that, and rub all that off, you would see it leaking. That efflorescence that's built up there is almost a self-healing thing where it holds the water in, but what you have no idea is how long is that going to hold or how bad is it. So we call that out. Furnaces. So this is a really common issue in high efficiency furnaces where this line right here has acid running through it and it's kicking out to a pump or down into a drain and it's leaking and it's going to rust through and corrode the furnace. And then if it gets down on all these components right here, it can damage them and completely wreck your air handler and usually means you need a new furnace. I have seen a 1.5-year-old Goodman furnace completely corroded out that needed to be replaced. So one more reason why take the cover off your furnace and check it once a year at a minimum. Better yet, call an HVAC contractor and take care of it. This is another common issue, is when people mess with their own furnaces and don't know how to hook it up correctly. This ducting right here is ductwork to transmit heat or air-conditioned air into the home. And it's not what's called a B-vent. A B-vent looks like this, where it's a dual-walled vent so that you have an insulated layer between extreme hot. Now this is in a laundry room, and you can see we got 227 degrees right there at that elbow. Or actually, I take that back, this is not B-vent then. So if you have 227 degrees right there and you back up and bump into it, how do you think your elbow is going to feel? Not great. Not great. So other stuff with HVAC, I thought this was really funny. Like, why would you put, you know, okay, we're going to send it out and bring it back. Yeah. This right here is an asbestos covering. One thing to know, we always call it out when we see it, but again, that varies wildly. If you don't touch it, it's not a big deal. As soon as you start touching it, it's a big deal. Is it in a place where you're never going to touch it? You might just leave it alone. If you want to finish off that section of the basement, people could bump into it, then you may need to have it remediated. One thing that I'll tell you, and I always am careful because I don't want to get sued with this, so I'm going to use the excuse of saying this is what a doctor has said. But I have heard somebody say that a doctor has said this, that they came in contact with asbestos, accidentally breathed it in, went into the hospital, and the doctor said, this is the only time you've come in contact with it? Yes. Well, you're probably fine then. For contractors who are coming in contact with this every day, or for instance, I had a realtor who had a cousin that lived in Israel in an older building that was constantly getting bombed, and they were breathing in the asbestos that was coming off of the ducting there. They ended up passing away. So it depends on the circumstances, but asbestos in a state like that is not a problem. It's when you start breathing it in, it becomes a problem. Plumbing. So plumbing, I would say, are the easiest things to fix that we find in home inspection reports that are typically in the hundreds of dollars easily, maybe less, depending if you do it yourself. But if ignored, can cause tens of thousands of dollars. So this one in particular, the vent was completely dislodged, and so sewer gases were just exhausting into the attic. This one right here, so cast iron will corrode through sometimes. Typically, you know, people will want us to call that out. I see enough cast iron where it still works, it's just fine, so I don't call it out as a defect. But if it's corroding through, I'm gonna call it out. And then this right here, don't ever use flexible stuff. That just captures all sorts of debris, clogs, and causes a lot more issues down the road. So,
That's
yeah. Electrical. So these are some issues that we have found. The number one big issue that we find in homes is when you see a stab lock or you see a, what's the other one called? Pushmatic. So if you have a pushmatic or a stab lock box, you got to know that, first of all, stab locks are considered an electrical hazard and need to be replaced. Pushmatics and stab locks, if anything fails on it or you have to replace a breaker or you want to expand the box, whatever you do, if you make any sort of changes, there are no parts out there. So you can probably buy them from somewhere used somewhere, but there are no parts that are readily available for stab lock or pushmatic, meaning that if you have a breaker that fails, you would need to replace the whole box. So you might as well be proactive about it and make sure you update your box so that it's accurate. This box right here was interesting because it was a tenant that completely, they were living in the house, the landlord hadn't been there in a long time, and they decided to run their own electrical. So you had wires just sticking into the box like this. They had ran a lot of their own, they had just bundles of wires sitting on top of a duct not far from there. You know, they have stuff like this where you have the two red wires for, you know, 3-pole systems that are improperly tied together, whereas this one is set up for a 240 volt, whereas this one isn't. And so there are so many things that can go wrong with electrical, especially inside of the box. Don't play around with it, call an electrician, because if you touch this wire right here, I'm sorry, if you touch this wire right here or this wire right here, you will die. So you're talking about 200 amps, 120 volts, which means, 24,000 watts that would be instantly going through your body versus a 60 watt light bulb to 24,000 watts. That's how much power is being given off through this per hour. So,
like in the cartoons, you'd be glowing.
yeah. Yeah, that's why to be very careful when you're messing around with this. There's also just weird stuff where like AT&T came and put their box right here. They blocked the shutoff box. So you couldn't get in and turn your power off, so AT&T needed to come and move that. And then this one, the box is just coming loose. Something to know about electrical is you do not own the meter. You own from where the splice is at inside of the meter into the house. Or if you have an overhead, you own where the splice is at that runs into the masthead and down. You own all of that except for the meter box. So depending on what's going on, you may need to call a utility company, you may need to call an electrician. Whenever we see knob and tube that's considered obsolete, needs to be removed, whether it's hot or not, it should be removed, because I don't know if it can turn on or not, unless I can see both ends of the wire. Most electricians, when they're taking it out, they just cut it off. They don't remove the knobs, they don't remove the tubes, but you at least cut the wires so that you know it's not going to anything. Or in some cases, there's a couple things going on here. So this just requires a screw to tie this into the wall. Super simple, right? But what you're supposed to do is this wire right here should be inside of a protective conduit. It shouldn't be just touching the wall for a variety of reasons. One, homes have vibrations. Over time that can wear stuff away, which can expose the conduit, the protective flexing conduit right there. If that does and somebody comes in contact with it, it's above a laundry machine, that could not be good. So,
Is that a gas line next to that electrical line?
yeah, that's pretty common to have gas,
That close?
gas and electric. Yeah, you can.
I mean, everything looks like it's being, like, it's hooked to the right towards
Yeah.
the gas line, like it should be straight.
Yeah, I would recommend putting it over here a little ways, but the reality is if you have a gas leak, whether you're 5 feet away or 20 feet away, it's eventually going to fill the room. And it's not just going to be that, it's going to be that, it's going to be a variety of issues. Attics. So attics need to be treated as an exterior space. You know, when you have different roof areas that are meeting right here, this one actually should be roof issues, not attic issues. But this was an example where you have two peaks that are meeting. Debris was sitting there and hadn't been cleaned off in a long time. You can see the baseball, and it eventually was rotting through the ceiling right there. So you want to take care of your roof. Anytime that you have moss growing on it as well, that's going to accelerate the deterioration of the roof. And then a couple other things in attics. So I've seen this more often than I thought I would, but completely charred out attics. Yeah, and the seller had no information on previous fires. And it's like, so who did the repairs and who qualified it and said the repairs were sufficient and okay?
Wow.
I don't know.
That was on the self-disclosure.
I've seen a lot of them where they're not. Yeah. And then this right here, this is a very common issue. You have a bathroom duct that's going up but not actually connected outside. Usually what that will do is it'll cause mold and will rot out the sheathing for the decking for the roof right there. Creates a soft spot, and if you have that going on and a roofer is walking around on your roof and they step through it, you become liable for that because that is a defect inside of your home. Whoever put that there creates the liability if a roofer gets hurt while they're up on the roof. Other random things that come up when we're looking at fireplaces and chimneys. This is for a gas fireplace. However, somebody could just lean right back. It says hot right on there. Usually there's a cage that goes around this, but in most cases you don't put a deck right where you have your gas fireplace chimney. This one's really common. You should have a cap that's on it. So it's a screen and a rain cap to prevent any sparks from flying away as well as rain from getting inside of it. And my most favorite thing, bats and raccoons. Which I saw raccoons and was growled at 2 weeks ago. So that was fun.
No, they don't mess around either.
No. And it sounded like a dog.
It does, when they bark,
Yeah.
too. They bark, they put babies. I had
Yep.
some in my house back 25 years ago,
Yeah.
and my first house, and they climbed in through the chimney, climbed down, and then they were up in my attic space. There was a big, huge nest of
Yep.
babies.
Yep. They're crazy. they're kind of cute. Yeah, they're kind of cute, but at the
They
same
are.
time, you don't want to get bit by one of those.
No.
Chimneys, it's very frequent that the mortar will be coming loose, the cap gets cracked, like right there. Again, have it repaired, but what I'll tell you is that there are far fewer masons, and doing masonry work is becoming more and more expensive all the time. You want to make good money, go become a mason. So a few things around advice for homeowners, some ways to prep them either before or after the inspection, but never be afraid of owning a home. It's a great experience. Things go wrong. That's part of owning a home. Just get used to it. And then second thing, I would say the more you're proactive around maintenance, the more it's going to save you down the road. We don't just give you this list so that you can ignore it. It's something where you can think about it and try and fix the things before they become bigger problems.
And you do give them a maintenance list too with your order, right?
Yep, they always get a maintenance list. We are in the process of everything's going to get switched to digitized, so the binders are going to go away. And they're going to actually get, it's like a home page now that's going to have all that stuff loaded.
Nice.
And then, you can reduce a lot of risk on a home by getting a home inspection. Tons and tons of risk. So always do it, but I understand the market's unique. This is just me and my wife. When we bought our first house, we went to town. That was her gift to me, was that sledgehammer right there. So we gutted the upstairs and redid it ourselves, and I can't tell you that I knew exactly what I was doing then, but I do now. So that's kind of it for Home Inspections 101. Type of stuff that you'd find. The main thing is knowing about the ASHI standards. One thing that I would recommend, I hope we all get to work together many, many times, but if you know of anybody who is using another home inspector that's not me, make sure you might advise them or anybody else in this office, look the home inspector up on ASHI or InterNACHI. If they are not a certified home inspector on either one of those websites, I would question what standards they're actually abiding by. The other reason why that's extremely important is most agents are taught or believe that you cannot refer a specific home inspector. In Michigan, I'm not surprised because home inspectors don't have to be licensed and they don't have to be insured. I'm not licensed, but I am certified through a number of different programs and I am insured. So if anything goes wrong, I carry errors and emissions insurance to make sure everybody is covered in the process. So, the other thing too is there's a lot of home inspectors out there where they do it part-time. I'm a full-time home inspector, Andrew's a full-time home inspector, that's what we do, that's how we provide for our families. So if we're not doing it right, we got bigger issues at home too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just know we are very dedicated to make sure this is a great process for everybody involved.
Well, not to mention, you don't, if you're not, like, you don't have to be insured and, you don't have to be licensed. You have no idea who you're letting into your house.
Yep, and you never know what they're gonna do, because I've had some agents show me videos like from Ring doorbell cameras of what home inspectors are doing, and it's like one of them was a guy walked up to a column and he grabbed it and he started like reaming on it, and it eventually jostled loose.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they're like, is this normal? No, I may go up to something and give it a tap tap with the foot, but I'm not gonna put my full weight into something.
Oh, right.
Well, if I suspect that it's rotted out or loose, I'm going to use an awl and I'm going to probe it. I'm not going to actually push on it.
Right.
Because if I damage it, well, again, I become liable for fixing that.